So I assume we all know by now that in connection with our 25th anniversary, we changed our name to Gesher, the Bridge Shul. And the name is partly a geographic reference. Most of the year, we're in Bridgehampton, and here we are at the foot of the Sag Harbor Bridge. But we chose the name more because of its meaning. Bridging speaks to the essence of pretty much everything I think religion should be, the functions it should serve. It's really, in many ways, the perfect metaphor for my Torah. You know, there's a saying that rabbis have basically one sermon, one teaching that they give over and over in different forms. And if I have one, it's connected to this. So what better theme this year than bridges and bridging? As I go into the teaching, I just want to ask for those on Zoom, if anybody has a spotlight on, if you could turn it off and use pin instead, because I really want to see everybody on Zoom when I'm teaching. So thank you. So probably the most famous Jewish text relating to Gesher, to a bridge, is the one I just sang. It's a teaching of Rav Nachman of Bratslav, and that particular setting was by a Bratslav Chassid in Israel by the name of Yosef Karduner. You have the text on the back page of the yellow handouts. Vada, know that a person needs to cross a very narrow bridge. But the essence and the most important thing is not to give into fear, not to frighten oneself. It's a famous text partly because it was adapted and made into a very, very popular song. You may know it as Kol Haolam Kulo Gesher Tzar Meod. Right, that's the more common setting. And it's also famous because it's actually a very, very powerful and inspiring teaching. It runs really deep. It captures, I think he meant to say, Nachman, he captures three primary meanings and associations with bridges, as well as some offshoots that I want to be exploring on these Heavenly Days. One is bridge as that which connects across a divide or a gap or a chasm between people and groups and ideas and values. A second is bridge as liminality, that which both represents and carries us through transition in space and in time. Bridges take us from here to there at times when we or our circumstances are changing. And of course, bridges also enable us to traverse difficult terrain, like the other very famous Jewish text about bridges, the bridge over troubled water. And these three functions and associations with bridges, I think, relate to ever-present challenges of the human condition, always. As we'll see, they're also especially highlighted on the Yamim Noraim. And I'm sure I don't have to tell you, they speak particularly to the challenges of the times we are living in. So much disconnection, loneliness, polarization, conflict. So much change and disorientation. Troubled waters, indeed. So we'll be exploring the ways in which Jewish thought and practice offer us help with those challenges, helping us to connect and carrying us through, how it serves as a bridge for us, and also how our tradition envisions our role. What does Judaism ask of us in becoming bridges ourselves, being the people who can connect across division? Being the people who help other people and society at large to get through times of transition, to make it across troubled water. Now, it's very likely that Rav Nachman drew his image of the narrow bridge from a teaching by his great-grandfather, the founder of Hasidism, the Baal Shem Tov. As I was researching this, I was quite surprised to discover that bridge is actually not such a common metaphor or image in Jewish sources. It's actually pretty rare. But I found in the teachings of the Baal Shem a very similar expression to the Gesher Tzar Ma'od. He writes, the Baal Shem, and by the way, he writes assuming this is like everybody knows this. It's in so many books, everybody knows, right? That, I've never seen it anywhere, that he writes of a very narrow bridge that the soul must cross after death when we're making the transition from this world to the next. And there is good reason to believe that that's the source of Rav Nachman's teaching, partly because of the rarity of the image in Jewish sources, and also because he likely would have known of it. This was his great-grandfather. So why does that matter? I think it matters because in taking this image of the very narrow bridge, Nachman radically transforms it in some really important ways. We'll only deal with one tonight. The one tonight is that what Nachman did is he said the crossing the narrow bridge isn't only what happens after death when the soul is transitioning to the next world. He said, no, it's about life itself, and it's all the time. Life is transition and change and liminality, and life is found, our vitality is found in connecting across all kinds of gaps and divisions, some of them seemingly unbridgeable, with other people, however great the divide, connecting body and soul, the material and the spiritual, bridging the gap between heaven and earth and all the parts of the self, connecting the human being with God, the individual with something larger, connecting seemingly disparate ideas, viewpoints, truths, walking a tightrope, balancing competing character traits, obligations, values. And notice also what Nachman did when he made this move. Notice that he himself connects life and whatever happens after life. Death is just crossing the next bridge. We've become accustomed to crossing our whole life. So as I said, a bridge is it's a pretty rare image in Jewish texts, but there are a few texts that use or evoke that image, and the ones that do are pretty cool. And we're going to encounter several of them on the journey. And for tonight, what I really wanted to do is just put 4 of them out there for you to mull over overnight, right? I'm not going to fully unpack them right now. Just sit with them, let them percolate, see where they take you. I promise that we will deal with them in depth by the end of Ne'ilah. So the first one is a text from the Talmud. And the Talmud asks, when are human beings examined? So what they mean by that is, when are people held accountable for their actions and subject to judgment? So if I were to ask you to guess what the Talmud says, you would probably say the answer is on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, right? This is the day of judgment when we're held to account, right? That's probably what you'd say. Wrong. Well, I mean, right, but not in this text, right? Elsewhere it says that. Here, it's in Masechet Shabbat on page 32a. Human beings, when are they examined? Reish Lakish said, B'sha'a she'ovrim al hagesher, at the moment they are crossing a bridge. The Talmud then says, wait, what? A bridge and no other time? And they answer, Kein Gesher, anything like a bridge, anything bridge-like. That's when we're examined. Fascinating, right? Maybe it suggests we might think of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur as Kein Gesher, something like a bridge when we are called to judgment. So that's text number one. The next two are both biblical narratives. And although they don't, neither of them in the Torah itself specifically uses the language of bridge, they both involve river crossings. One is in Genesis, one is Deuteronomy, in a lovely, lovely coincidence. Just like the last text was on page 32, each of these is in chapter 32 of their respective books. And 32, by the way, if you write it in Hebrew, spells lev, which is heart. Just saying, nice coincidence. So the Deuteronomy one, which we'll actually read a week from now on Shabbat Shuvah in the Torah, the Deuteronomy one takes place as the people Israel are about to cross the river Jordan into the promised land. And Moses is told to ascend Har Ha'avarim, which if we translate literally is the mountain of transitions or crossings. The name of the mountain, Avarim, actually echoes our name. First connected to Abraham and then Joseph and then all of us, Ivrim. We are Hebrews, Ivrim. We are the transitioners, the ones who cross over. The Genesis text is Yaakov's crossing of the river Yabok, where he has his famous wrestling match with the unknown being and where he and we acquire our other name, Yisrael. Less famously, but very evocatively, on not the wrestling, but the river crossing, when Yaakov brings his whole household and all his stuff across the river, here's what the classical Midrash says. Rav Huna, in the name of Rabbi Idi, Asa atzmo kegesher. He made himself like a bridge, taking from here and placing there. So those are the two biblical texts. And notice that both of them are associated with our names, our mission as a people. And I want to suggest that the Yomim Noraim, these days of judgment and rapprochement, are indeed ke'en gesher, something like a bridge. On these days, we, each of us as individuals and all of us together, stand at the edge of two rivers, the banks of the Yabok, and on Har Ha'avarim, the hilly region of change on the edge of the Jordan. We come to the Yabok to wrestle with ourselves and the other and God, to claim our status as Yisrael, Ivrim, struggling until we're able to wrest blessing from whatever it is that keeps us stuck. And we stand as a people on Har Ha'avarim, and we get a view from the bridge. From here, we can gaze into the promised land, taking courage and hope to forge a new identity, a new society, a new future. And finally, one last text to think about, which we will revisit on Yom Kippur. It's a very old legend of unknown origin, at least that I and our Yiddish expert at JTS could find. But it is the inspiration for a fair amount of Yiddish poetry and literature. And according to this legend, in the days of the Messiah, the people Israel, and some say all the righteous people of any religion and background, will cross over to the promised land on the Paparina brick, the paper bridge. A paper bridge. Why paper? Sit with it. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I'm sorry. For now, I want to just close with two poems. poems that are both in your handout. The first is one of those Yiddish poems inspired by this legend. It's by Moshe Leib Halpern. And what you have here is that I'll read is a translation by Catherine Hellerstein that I adapted. Halpern, the poet, was raised in Galicia, then moved at age 12 to Vienna to study commercial art. And then at age 22, emigrated to New York to avoid military conscription. So from transitions and times of change, he knew. This poem was in his first collection, published in 1919. In English translation, it's called Tell. The second, which I read in many ways as a companion piece, although I doubt the poet was familiar with Halpern, is by contemporary poet Matthew Olsman, written just a couple of years ago. Not about a paper bridge, but a rope bridge. Tell. Come. Be a mother to me. My mother told a story of a paper bridge. Tell it to me too. And tell of the birds returning in summer. Drive from my bed the bad dreams that come every night, every night. Tell me about the angels who came and brought me golden stars. And if church bells peal, cover my ears, cover them and say that the town clock strikes. And if the wind wails in the shutters, say that Father sits at a sefer, a holy book, and sings. Tell that it is warm summer outdoors, and that singing, the peasants walk from the fields. Tell, for perhaps telling may still my sorrow and bring some brightness to my world. Letter to a bridge made of rope. To the shepherd herding his flock through the gorge below, it must appear as if I walk on the sky. I feel that too. So little between me and the fall. But this is how faith works its craft. One foot set in front of the other, while the wind rattles the cage of the living, and the rocks down there cheer every wobble. Your threads keep this braided business almost intact, saying, don't worry. I've been here a long time. You'll make it across.